Hi guys! I just had a quick word on some aspects of interest groups that I think you might benefit from as a supplement to this week's lesson. First off, I just want to show you guys this picture here. The woman that you see in red and white is my grandmother. She was vice president of a labor union called CWA, Communication Workers of America, and this is the 1983 CWA nationwide strike. So that was pretty cool. One important aspect to understand about interest groups is that they are a group of people that organize because they have some common interest, and their goal is to influence the governmental programs and policies, okay? And that's an important distinction to make between interest groups and political parties. Interest groups care about programs and policies that come out of government that might affect their particular special interest, whereas political parties, although they're also a group of people that come together for their own special interest, usually it's ideological, they are not interested in the programs and policies so much as the people that they can get elected into governmental office. So interest groups care about programs and policies. Political parties care about people and having their members elected to represent government. And interest groups also will try to influence largely anybody who is involved with the execution of public policy. That means politicians, people who work in the bureaucracy. The judicial branch can also be influenced by interest groups, and you and I, the public, the electorate, because we do have a representative democracy, which means that we elect the people to act on our behalf. And so if interest groups are trying to influence legislators and the legislature is acting on our behalf, they also have to influence us. And there's this theory that exists called the pluralist theory. I'm sure you all are familiar with the concept that we have a lot of interest groups. I'm sorry about that again. I don't know how to get this off. Let's close that out. There's a lot of interest groups that exist in the United States and throughout other nations as well. And the pluralist theory argues that this is actually a good thing. Ordinary people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to involve themselves in politics or government are now able to have a medium to express their ideas. Citizens can connect to government through the interest groups. And then when you have lots of interest groups competing for influence in government, it ends up creating a moderation and compromise. So pluralist theory posits the idea that people are able to connect through interest groups to government in a way that they wouldn't be able to do on their own. And having competing interest groups results in compromise and moderation and several viable options for the electorate, which is you and I. The argument here is that citizens will join an interest group or using that interest group as a means to their democratic process. So interest groups strengthen democracy because ordinary people are able to go through it. The problem here, which I'm sure you guys have already thought about, is there's three different flaws in this theory. First of all, representational inequalities. We have overrepresentation, a lot of interest groups that represent big money, big pharma, big businesses and corporations, banks, Wall Street, but we don't have a lot of interest groups that represent the poor and undereducated. They don't have as many modes of representation as somebody who are more white collar, have more money, and have more education. So representational inequalities. Resource inequalities. Big businesses and professional associations tend to have a lot more money, which means that they can have more say in government. They're able to hire more lobbyists to go on work in government's behalf. They have more ways to help benefit their members than places like the Sierra Club, which is an environmental an environmental association, an environmental interest group. There are more lobbyists for drug companies in Washington than there are actual members of Congress. So that should give you an idea. And then there's the access inequality by way of an iron triangle. An iron triangle is going to be an alliance between three areas of the legislature. You have your bureaucratic agency, Congress, and the defense contractors. And usually it's like an I scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of situation with somebody already involved in these. And it's very difficult for an outside party to penetrate this triangle. Once they've formed this relationship, it's difficult to break. Like, why would you, if you have this pretty sweet deal going with Congress and your executive agency, why would you want to kind of change that up with something exterior to that might cause conflict? There's another problem called the free rider dilemma. Free rider dilemma is something that I'm sure you all are all familiar with. How to attract paid members when the benefits of that interest group are available to everybody, whether or not you're joining. So, for example, everybody has the right to bear arms with, a few exceptions. So how does the NRA attract people to get paid memberships when, regardless if you're a member of the NRA or not, you still are allowed to have your Second Amendment right to bear arms? Or the Sierra Club. Everybody enjoys clean air. So how does the Sierra Club attract paid memberships when the benefits of their existence, the clean air and the environmental regulations, are available to everybody regardless? And the answer to that, I'm just getting over a little cold. The answer to that is selective benefits, providing them materials that only members can benefit from. So discounts, community and connectedness, satisfaction, usually a lot of discounted products, or you get some swag when you join. Things like that are reasons why people would want to join. So for instance, I donate to PBS because if I do, not only do they continue to thrive, and so I have this personal satisfaction, but I also am able to receive discounts on certain movies that I might want to show during courses that might be relevant, and just regular information, television shows that I might find relevant, educational resources, and things like that. So interest groups tend to do several things. They will speak on behalf of their members. So the NRA tends to advocate for Second Amendment rights on behalf of their members. They mobilize people, which means they go out, get the word out, and hope that people will start participating in government for their interest. They also hold officials accountable. If somebody is acting against the values of their NRA, I'm using the NRA as an example. If they're acting against something that the NRA would be interested, they will make that public and advocate against it. And the main point here is that people cannot do this on their own. There's power in numbers. So if you're trying to hold an official accountable who might be acting against your better interest, if we're still talking about guns, if Joe Biden is trying to advance a piece of legislation that makes it difficult for people to purchase firearms, as an individual speaking out against that, it might be very difficult to gain any traction. But if you have power in numbers, it's quite different. Makes a lot more waves. There's also something called right-to-work laws, and these legislations stipulate that you cannot be denied membership or employment based on membership or non-membership of a labor organization. And this is significant, right? Because if you're trying to get a job and no one will hire you because you are not a member of the union, or no one will hire you because you are a member of the union, it makes things very difficult. So we have 24 states in the United States, Texas being one, and I say Texas because I'm from Texas, that say you cannot implement laws denying employment to the people, regardless of their affiliation with the labor union. So, by way of example, if you wanted to get a job at AT&T, You do not have to be a member of their labor union in order to get employment. The problem here is that when you have these members, have these kind of laws saying that you don't have to be a member or you don't have to join, it makes a free rider dilemma. Why would anybody want to pay union dues when the benefits of those unions are available to everybody? And this goes back to the selective benefits. It also takes away the collective bargaining power of unions. So companies are less likely to work with unions because why would they, when they still have people who are not members who will continue to work even if the union goes on strike? And there's several different reasons, kind of shifting gears here, that an interest group is going to form in the United States. Usually, the larger ones are trying to protect their economic interests, like money, to advance a social movement like the NAACP. Governmental benefits is a relatively new phenomenon. And then request to respond governmental regulation, or to prohibit governmental regulation, to tell government they need to start doing something or to prevent them from doing something. And there's different kinds of interest groups. There's so many different kinds. Membership organizations are people, private groups whose members are you and I, regular people, individuals. NAACP, things like that. You don't have to be a banker in order to be a member of these things. Non-membership organizations are going to be interest groups that represent businesses but don't have broad-based support. Usually, unless you're a banker or maybe you run a restaurant, you're not going to be part of Bank of America's union or interest group or El Chico Corporation. You know, we don't, as an average citizen, we don't have much interest in the things that they're trying to advance. Governmental organizations represent largely municipalities like city, local government, and some state agencies as well. And this can be broken down into the several different interests as well. Public interest, issues that are for everybody. Ideological groups promote policies that are specific to an ideology, like the Republican or conservative movement, the alt-right movement, Tea Party movement, liberals, things like that. And this is just the way that they can change the political landscape, or what they do to get their information out there. Furnishing information, I'm sure we've all received a pamphlet of some kind for some interest group that's trying to get out information about something that's about to happen. They can politicize certain issues, like during the Pulse nightclub shooting, we had a lot of interest groups trying to advocate gun control regulation. They also had NRA trying to advocate against gun control regulation, politicizing issues that generally weren't political. Conflict mediation generally is just trying to resolve an issue in government. So after the Pulse nightclub shooting, we had a lot of discussion about gun control. And so when they have that conflict, the responsibility of the interest group is to try and alleviate that, mediate it. Electioneering is extremely important. So people who are involved with an interest group statistically are more likely to go out and vote. And so if you can get people in your interest group to go and try and recruit outside members to go participate by voting, by supporting candidates, making donations, knocking on doors, generally you're going to have a much better outcome. And again, promoting political participation. People who join interest groups are going to be more likely to go out and vote and facilitate political participation. And this is one of the more interesting aspects of interest groups, is how they can advocate for their interest. Lobbying is going to be the main one. Lobbying is going to be directly attempting to influence a policy through persuasion. This is, again, a picture of my grandmother and Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker of the House during the late 70s, early 80s. This is lobbying was called lobbying because they would go meet out in the lobby of the Capitol building, trying to influence how legislators voted or behaved on a certain issue. Persuading the public is educating, providing institutional advertising, making their issue known to people by maybe staging protests or grassroots campaigns. During the civil rights movement, the sit-ins and the freedom riders were going to be something like this. Through PR, usually is to promote the interest not only in government, but through the mainstream, using media. PR is done a lot during campaigning. You'll see a lot of, usually more negative ad campaigning is done through interest groups, sponsoring a political candidate, or making a specific issue more public, especially during a campaign. Forming alliances is really cool. This is when you'll see more than one interest group come together on a certain issue, creating a dynamic that's too difficult to ignore. One that I really enjoyed is the alliance between National Organization for Women, NOW, League of Women Voters, and the National Abortion and Reproductive Rights. These are usually more liberal-leaning, but every now and then you can get a couple of women's rights groups and an ideological interest group to promote against something like pornography. So with that one, that example was when you have two different sides, the liberal women's rights movement and the conservative ideological interest group coming together, hitting them from both sides. Trying to influence the judicial branch through litigation is probably the most effective and fastest way to advocate change. When this happened a lot during the civil rights movement, they can bring forth a lawsuit directly on behalf of a group like NAACP versus Hearts of Atlanta Motel when they see something that is against their particular interest. In this example, it would be against the civil rights movement. Financing a suit by an individual. Brown versus Board of Education was financed through an interest group. If you remember, Brown was I think she was an 11-year-old girl. She couldn't finance that kind of court case all the way to the Supreme Court. She needed help from an interest group. They could also file a companion brief, which is a friend of the court, of an existing case. If you look up on oyez.com, which is a Supreme Court website that has all of the opinions written from Supreme Court cases, you'll see, especially in some of the more recent ones, like the same-sex marriage case, that not only was it a plaintiff and a defendant, it was a plaintiff plus all of the people who had a stake in the outcome of the case. And then, of course, there's electoral politics. If you can get a favorable legislator elected, that is a legislator that shares an interest or is sympathetic to that interest group, elected into office, you're going to have a lot better time trying to advocate for your interest. And so they could do that by creating political action committees, hosting fundraisers, trying to get out electioneering and try and get your legislator elected, which is why people running for office tend to want to be make an alliance with an interest group, because having an interest group on your side can greatly increase your chances of success in that campaign. This is actually a recent phenomenon. You'll notice that interest groups went on the rise here, especially ideological interest groups, after the 2008 election, where everything else kind of went down. You'll see the effects of public interest or ideological, like the Koch brothers or something like that. If you'd like to click on, I'll upload this PowerPoint, and these are links to grassroots campaigns and interest group sponsored activism trying to get out and mobilize people to go vote. And the person who regulates all of these, especially the political action committees and things like that, involvement in campaigns is the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. They enforced laws, they facilitate disclosures to make sure that people weren't getting money from illegal sources or didn't have any kind of illegal involvement in the elections. And then, I'm sure you'll all hear about super PACs and how much money a super PAC can give to a campaign, and that's a 527 group because of the tax code that they use when they file. And they can spend and collect as much money without any legal limits to advocate for or against a particular issue. Alright, well that's all I have for interest groups. I hope this helped a little bit. I'm sorry that I was so nasally. This cold is stuck around for almost 2 weeks now. I'll also upload a political parties lecture to see if that'll help you a little bit on your lesson this week also. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks!